And we're live.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Hope you have had a good week. I have. It's just been a little hectic, as I think I may have mentioned. I will be having my second son any day now. Um, so anytime I plan anything like a weekly web show, for example, I'm like, is it going to be canceled this week? I don't know. Um, as you can see below, if you're watching the video version of this show, my name is the Reverend Dr. Sir Colin D. Terrio. I am the leader of an organization called the Cult of Copy, and we are simply a discussion group who enjoys the topics of persuasion and influence and social engineering and all that creepy kind of stuff for purposes of, as noble as possible. Usually, our purposes are making money by selling people things. If you're interested in joining us, you can join us at cultofcopy.com, which is spelled below my name there if you are watching on video. But if you're just listening to the audio version, which will exist at some point in the future, I promise, you may even be listening to it now. Not like literally right now when I'm recording it, but now in the future. We will be on iTunes and Stitcher and wherever else I can manage to stick the audio version of this podcast. The show is recorded weekly, live, Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, either here from my back porch or from my office, which will have internet probably sometime after this baby is born, when I can like set an appointment for it. Because when you call the cable company to say, hey, I want like services set up, they're like, we have an opening 3 Thursdays from now, somewhere between 7 a.m. and 12 midnight. Can you be available there all day at that time? Um, so I haven't really opened that can of worms to get internet set back up at the office until we have this whole baby situation taken care of. But until then, obviously, we can film the show from my back porch, which actually used to do quite a lot of. In fact, for the aficionados out there, I don't know if you can find this like on black hat sites because you can't download it legitimately anywhere, but I did a live video episode of my old show from this back porch while barbecue grilling lamb chops live on the show. So that was a fun one. Maybe we'll do another cooking episode again here in the future. But regardless, new episodes are recorded Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern if you would like to join us. If you're listening to this as a recording, great. This is episode 8. We have plenty more for you to listen to, both backwards in time and hopefully very, very forward in time from this moment. Um, this week's episode, as you may know if you watched last week I intended to talk about selling the 7 deadly sins. And we made it just a bit more than halfway because 7 doesn't go evenly in half. So we did 4 last week. We'll do the remaining 3 this week. But what we talked about are how the 7 deadly sins are considered to be deadly because what they speak to are these unsatisfiable human appetites, right? They're not just a singular desire. Things like lust and greed and envy and pride, all of these are things that are based on appetites, meaning you feel it, but it doesn't ever get satisfied. Like you can feed it and it'll get full, but then it'll regenerate. You constantly need to feed these desires if you start, feeding them just a little bit. And that's why they're so actually useful in marketing. Last week, we already covered lust, but lust is a well-known feature of advertising because everyone knows the phrase sex sells. That shows you that appetite for uh, insatiable lust can be applied to almost anything. It's a universal human drive. So if you just add a layer of that to anything, whether it's like a beer commercial or whatever, you can get some leverage out of it because it's an unsatisfiable human drive. But what we also talked about last week is that it's not just this drive to satisfy this quote unquote sin, it's based on an actual biological evolutionary drive. So, for the case of lust, as an example, that's based on the drive to reproduce, right? humanity has since evolved to a creature that has sex for pleasure, but really the reason we do it, the reason it feels good to us in the first place is because we're evolved to want to do it because that's how we propagate our species. Um, so we're going to talk about the last three sins we had left, which I believe are greed, envy, and wrath. But before we get into that, we're going to do the usual stuff I say the usual stuff. We just started it last week, but it was a feature of the old show, and I'd like to bring it back, where we just kind of talk about general marketing and influence and persuasion kind of ideas. This week we're going to talk about something I did sort of as a prank, kind of, on my timeline on Facebook, and we're going to talk about a post that I made in the Cult of Copy very recently. I made this post this week. We're going to talk about what the point of that post was, both of which should give you some useful insight into not only how to persuade other people, but maybe how you yourself are persuaded. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is I posted a news story that was actually pretty old and had since been contradicted, but I wanted to see people's reaction to it because I'll give you all the details in a second, but basically the idea is it's a news story where when it first hit, the people in control of the narrative of that story had a certain agenda, so the story was framed in a certain way to agitate their emotions and instincts, right? But the reality of that story came out later and didn't get covered as much in the news media because when it first hit, nobody actually did their research and they bit the manufactured story hook, line, and sinker. So they basically had to admit they were wrong and run retractions if they updated the story. So they didn't do that. But what it revealed is sort of, if you can frame your story in a way that already factors in people's existing suspicions and wishes about the way the world is, but not in a positive way, in a negative way. Like, if you can tap into revealing something negative that people believe about the way that the world operates, they will almost always automatically believe it with zero research or anything, because it confirms a bias they have. Like, if they think the world is shitty in a particular way, any story that supports that is going to get an instant share on Facebook. The trick was, when I found this story, I remembered it from when it actually occurred, which was back in October of last year. So what is that? October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. So that's 8 months. I do count on my fingers because I went to art school. 8 months that the story happened, and what's crazy is it was only 2 months later it was completely reversed. So here's the story. When it first hit the news, the story was this honor student who's the captain of her volleyball team in, I think it was Massachusetts, this high school, gets a call from her friend on the weekend, and her friend's like, I'm super drunk at this party, come get me and take me home. So she goes to the party. Right when she gets there, the police show up, and the police let her go and take her friend home. Other kids got summonses and tickets and everything, but she got to go home because she was sober. And then it turns out she gets suspended from 5 games of volleyball and loses her captain position because the school's policy for athletics, the whole whatever region, county, or whatever manages their school board, that's the policy across the board, is you can't participate in illegal activities or teen alcohol parties, right? Because it's illegal for teenagers to drink alcohol here in the States. The age they were all underage. The position that the school took, and again, you'll have to read more details of the story, but basically the school said providing transportation counts as participating. Even though you weren't yourself drinking, your aim was to pick up your friend and smuggle her away and let all these teenagers continue drinking at this party and potentially terrible things happening. So You provided transportation, which would be just the same as providing a location or providing the alcohol or whatever. You participated. Even though you yourself weren't drunk, you participated. So she had these consequences, which the story that was published actually came from this girl's family's lawyer, because they sued the school saying she did, quote unquote, the right thing by going to pick up her drunk friend. Now, as a recent parent, like my oldest son is like 2.5, so like him drinking alcohol is hopefully far, far in the future. But this idea that like you secretively going to pick up your drunk friend from a party and drive them home safely while informing no adult authority figures whatsoever that this is happening. As a kid, I would have got my ass whooped in that situation. Like, I'm doing a more right thing than not picking my friend up, but it's not the right thing. The right thing is like you tell an adult, you bring an adult. By the way, I keep cracking up because in my screen I see Zane in the lower right-hand corner laughing at me. But to me, and you know, your opinion may be different, the right thing, not the easy thing, not the cool thing, not, it's like what this girl chose to do is do a solid by her friend and do a favor for all the other kids at that party. She was just going to go allegedly pick up her friend and take her away. She was doing the cool thing that wouldn't piss off the other kids, and she was doing a solid by her friend. But that's not the right thing. The right thing would be shutting the whole party down. Because, like, she picked up her friend, but that doesn't mean any of the other kids who are drunk at that party aren't going to kill themselves or someone else in a car accident, or none of the rest of them are going to make some bad decisions that lead to assault charges later on. Who knows, right? So she didn't do the quote-unquote right thing, but that was the way this lawyer spun it in a press release with all of these news outlets picked up in October of 2013. As if this girl, all she did, she just got the call, she dropped what she was doing, she went to pick up her friend. The police immediately showed up in the confusion while she, you know, cut a swath through these partying teenagers to beeline to her friend and spirit her away to safety. But what really happened, and this, again, didn't come out until a couple of months later, none of the news outlets ran it because they would have had to basically be running it as her attraction. As part of the lawsuit of her parents against the school, first of all, I want to say the story I shared was from Fox News, shared by Dr. Laura, which was super funny because somebody in my following immediately pointed out, they're like, what, you listen to Dr. Laura now? Like, what the fuck? But excuse me, I don't actually, it just kind of showed up in my newsfeed because someone else shared it. But they also pointed out, I want to say, I got more comments on my post of it than Dr. Laura did since October 2013, and I got more in 24 hours on my post. Anyways, I digress. In this original post, the headline says she was suspended. Now, everyone's immediate reading of that is that she was under, like, academic suspension, like as if like she was forced to miss school for doing the quote-unquote right thing. But that wasn't the case. Like, she was suspended from 5 extramural volleyball games. Like, that didn't happen during school hours. That's like sports. That's extra. She was suspended from 5 games. Not a whole season. Not like she wasn't kicked off the team. She just had to sit out 5 games, which then led to her, like, you can't be the captain of the team if you can't go to 5 of the games. So they removed her captainship. But the way the article made it seem, and like most of the people who commented on my article thought it was like academic suspension. So even that right there is like part of the spin, using the word suspended in a way that you wouldn't think. Because I say like sports are a privilege, and most of these schools have this like sports agreement for behavior, especially if you're in a leadership position as a kid, because all sporting events are like outside of school time, right? So they're essentially like vouching for you and spending money on you. You get special consideration for like jobs in the locality, and you know, maybe local scholarships, all the way up to a sports scholarship. Essentially, if you're on the school sports team, the school is in some way vouching for you. So they have to make you agree in some way to a certain modicum of behavior and set consequences for that behavior. And then like your parents actually sign that agreement too. It's just like a permission slip for anything the school does. So that's what happened is she was in violation of that athletic agreement. So they had to suspend her from some games as punishment, and then she lost her captainship. Her parents sue the school. The lawyer issues this statement. It gets picked up over all these news agencies because, like I said, there's this undercurrent in America of people who think like schools are super backwards and they indoctrinate your kids to be bad and they punish good behavior and reward bad behavior and all of these kind of things. So there's this whole strata of American society that like immediately wants to believe a story that supports that assertion. So no one did their research, no one looked it up. Lo and behold, 2 months later, this girl, as part of the trial, has to issue a written confession that she was at the party for over an hour, also drank alcohol herself, left the party with her friend after the police let her go, deliberately did not tell the school, even though the school had put out a bulletin that, like, if you were involved in this party at which the police were called, like, kids got arrested, some kids got tickets, like, it was a big deal. They were like, if you were involved in this, you need to tell the school administration because there might be, you know, disciplinary consequences depending on what activities you're involved in. She not only didn't tell the school, she played in like 2 more volleyball games while all of this controversy is happening at the school without telling anyone she was involved, until it came out that her name was on a list that she was getting a summons for underage drinking, as because the cops interviewed her at this party. So anyway, the lawsuit ended up getting thrown out. But what I thought was super, super interesting about this story is that it all had to do with the framing. So even though, like, at face value, to me, the quote-unquote right thing, like this article claimed, is not secretively smuggling your friend away from an alcohol teenage party. Lots of people said, oh, well, when you were a teenager, you drank. Fuck yes, I did way worse. I could be in jail, honestly, for some of the stuff that I did when I was young. I just didn't get caught. But if I had got caught, that would have been my own fault, and my parents wouldn't have been able to, like, sue because of something I did that was wrong, and everyone knows it's wrong. So that was my take on it. But even though there's like disagreement there where some people are like, well, it's better than nothing, and at least, you know, she was saving that one friend for potentially messing up her life, and that's a good thing. And I agree, that is a good thing. But what this girl is being punished for is violating the athletic contract. So even though, yes, driving your friend home drunk is a good thing, the right thing to do that would have protected her athletics agreement would be like, hey, mom and dad, my drunk friend just called me to come get her from a party. What should I do? You know, getting adults involved would have like exonerated her. But because she was like trying to help cover it up, even though that's the cool thing to do and you don't want to be a pariah with all your friends and the peer pressure, I get it. I get it. That doesn't mean it's right. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't fix it in my mind. Regardless, so many people wanted to believe that story. They didn't look into it. They didn't back it up. They didn't even call the school, because the school didn't even have a zero tolerance policy. What it turns out, like, if you calculate it, this girl got like, the punishment they gave her was like 25% of what was possible based on her offense. So they had already given her like the benefit of the doubt beyond what was required. It wasn't a zero tolerance policy at all. And then apparently, like, her family had like butted heads with the school before over different issues. So there was like all of this stuff that didn't make it into the original story, again, because that original story was created by the family's lawyer and fed to the news media, which jumped all over it. But I'm glad to say this is one case where like popular opinion didn't do anything for her, because by the time it hit the judge's desk, she had like issued a confession completely making the case irrelevant, and it got thrown out. But that, from a persuasion standpoint, was very interesting to me, because when I revealed that the story had been updated and all of these things were reversed, everybody backed very far away from it, even though, like, in the original story, there are things that just don't add up. I mean, no, mom and dad, I went straight to the party and made a beeline through the crowd to grab my friend and secret her way And just sheerly coincidentally, that is right when the police showed up to interview everyone. You know, like, as a professional liar, that could use some work. But so many people, like I said, when you tell a story that is the story people want to believe, they already have a predisposition to believe that story. As long as it sounds good, they will buy it because it confirms a belief that they already have. And that leads me into the second thing I wanted to talk about before we get to the actual topic of the show, which is a post I made in the Cult of Copy, which you can go and read. It should still be towards the top of the page nowish when this episode's being recorded. The idea of the post is that in the post I say I'm going to reveal the secret of tricking smart people. And the post opens up with saying, look, if you're in the Cult of Copy already, I know you're smart, because if you're interested in the subject of persuasion, that's a combination of science and art. And if you're interested in science and art, you're probably a smart person. You know, like, it's not something stupid people are interested in. So I'm not going to dumb any of this down. And then the post proceeded to lay out like a scientific case for why smart people are actually easier to trick than dumb people, because dumb people are they have their guard up because they get tricked all the time being dumb, whereas smart people, they're like, I'm too smart to trick. So their guard is down, and it's easier to trick them. And I said it's like a sophisticated attack, and I named like 15 different psychological sounding buzzwords that come into play as part of this attack. And then when I got to the end of the post, I said, like, the trick is really a lot easier. It's got nothing to do with any of that psychological stuff. But if you believe that, it's because the trick worked. Did you spot it? And what this caused a lot of people to post very long, very detailed, awesome analyses of my post, which was literally 99% bullshit, except for the very first line where I said, I know you're smart, so I'm not going to dumb this down. That's literally the whole secret to tricking smart people, is you just say, look, man, I can tell you're not just some asshole off the street. You're totally smart. I get it. I'm going to skip all the bull crap that I normally tell people. I'm going to get right down to it. And then you say a bunch of stuff that sounds good, sounds logical, and they just buy it. They, like, believe it. And what's crazy is in this thread, so many people, like, literally reverse engineered my entire message line by line, talking about, like, when I was naming the psychological terms, I did them in groups of 3. That's just how I write. It's just meter, you know, it sounds good. I was just bullshitting. It was not like a deliberate plan. I knew it would sound good because groups of 3 sound good to the human ear. I don't know, they just do, you know. ABC, 1, 2, 3. People like 3s. It's a magic number, if you remember that song from Schoolhouse Rock. 3 is a magic number, so, like, that had nothing to do with the persuasive quality. Literally all it is pandering, straight up pandering. You're smart, I can tell. I'm just not going to bullshit you, right? Let's get straight to it. And then you can give literally the exact same talk you give every other idiot that comes through the door. It's just tapping into people's bias. And then the comments on this thread, and again, as analyses of my bullshit go, they're very good. Like, I'm told I'm good at bullshitting. I'm going to get value out of their analyses of, like, the latter part. And there are people say, well, you have a pre-existing reputation, so that's why it worked. Or you're actually very good at this other subtle stuff, and that worked. Maybe. But to me, in my mind, and I've seen it work, it's just the pandering part. Because people will justify all the other stuff you're telling them if they buy into your assertion that they are, in fact, very smart. And what was funny about that post is I said, I'm going to tell you what it is in the comments later after many people had guessed. I said, I'm going to tell you what it is, but when I tell you how simple it is, some of you are not going to believe it. You're going to, like, literally insist there's way more complicated stuff going on, and you're going to disagree with me. But I promise, like, that's wrong. It's literally as simple as I said it is, but your pride will not let you admit that it's that simple and stupid. And sure enough, that's what happened. Again, not to denigrate it, like your an analysis of the stuff that came after in the post may be very well valid and all of that. But really, I promise, if you want to trick a smart person into listening to whatever it is you want them to accept, just say, look, I can tell you're smart. You probably don't get fooled a lot. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to give you some stupid hype. We're just going to talk about a few things, and if they make sense to you, we'll carry on from there. And then you can literally tell them whatever you want, like, because you flip the switch. That's the only switch that they wanted flipped, and it really is that simple, no matter how smart someone is. Like, people wonder all the time, oh, this smart person got, like, taken by a con artist, or this otherwise seemingly smart person ended up being in some weird cult and they gave them all their money, and I don't know why. How did that happen? They must have these magical powers of persuasion. They don't. Like they do, but the powers are not that hard. It's that people are generally stupid and give away a lot more than they think that they do. So, like, it does not take a genius to begin like a harmful cult movement. It's just a little bit of charisma will give you the confidence to say what you want to say, and then you tell people what they want to hear. And then once they're like, yeah, I am super smart, then you start giving them the bullshit, and they will just drink it up and be like, well, that sounds good. This is why it must be working. You know, like they'll sell whatever it is to themselves, which is of course even better, because then they think following you further from that point is their own idea, when it really isn't. It's your idea, you just gave it to them. But that was a fun thread. Check it out if you want. Again, if you're not a member of our community already, currently if you go to cultofcopy.com, that redirects to the Facebook group where this discussion occurred. In the future, maybe that URL will point to a page other than the Facebook community, but it'll have a link to it, so it shouldn't be hard to find. That said, we are at the halfway point. This is normally where we do some kind of advertisement. I'm going to put Zane on the spot because I forgot to do it earlier in the show like I said I would. Normally, this is where we would have an advertisement. We would do a house advertisement or an advertisement for anything, product, service, whatever, that you may sell that you think would be of interest to our audience. The Cult of Copy has 7,000, almost 8,000 now. I think we're going to break 8,000 before the end of the month. 8,000 members from 90 countries around the world, including all 50 United States and all of our territories. So if you have something that you think would appeal to our audience, get in touch about an advertising spot, and you can have this one and also the one at the end of the show. And they'll live on forever as part of this podcast, which will be, again, available here on YouTube if you're watching it here, or iTunes or Stitcher or any number of other places. So get in touch if that's something you're interested in. But I've mentioned a couple of times, I brought up our director, Zane, who does this live Google Hangout streaming straight to YouTube thing, and he's a bit of an expert in it. And that's why he helps me out, and I will give him a second to tell you about his services and how you can get in touch with him if you would want to do a show like this one if you're watching it on YouTube, because he's the guy to help you. Go ahead, Zane.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, as Colin was saying, this is kind of my gig. This is what I do. I do it as a service directly for, you know, like a custom approach, like I'm doing with Colin. But I also have a Google Plus group that actually focuses on the bigger picture, not just Hangouts, but also YouTube and Google Plus and the promoted video platform called AdWords for Video. So if you're interested in things like that, I also believe that the fellow cultists here, because I'm also part of the Cult of Copy, I think you guys would really like it because it gives you a wider perspective of all of the stuff. Like everything that Colin teaches, I just drink up myself, because I know that if I apply what he teaches to the Hangout stuff that I do, I can give, you know, my clients extra benefit to how I can service them. So again, if it's something that interests you and you're interested in starting a show, you can have, you know, we can negotiate a way to have a custom setup, but also we have an awesome community over on Google Plus that teaches the big picture of all of them. So reach out to me. You can email me at zane@infospringmedia.com and go from there, or you can also reach out to me on Facebook and I'll shoot you a link over to the community. So that's it. Thanks, Colin.
Awesome, man. Yeah, check Zane out because the only reason I'm able to do any of this stuff is because he's helping me. Um, I also love his super old school email address. I used to have an Earthlink email address that I gave up ages ago because I'm like, who cares about that? They went out of business. But that would be awesome now. I could literally still have an at earthlink.net email address. For anyone who wasn't on the internet in like the late 90s, you don't give a crap about that. They were one of the last places you could get like cheap dial-up service.
Oh
Can you
yeah.
even buy that? Like, are there companies that still even sell dial-up? Can you even get on the internet with a phone modem?
I don't even know, but you know what? I really want to find a bunch of those old AOL CDs that they used to throw out in the mail like all the time, and you just throw them away. Now I want
Seriously,
them, right?
you know what's funny is one tidbit is that I have a copy of Windows 3.11 on
No.
like the giant black super floppies, like the five
Right?
what's that 5 1/4s. It's like in
Wow.
my old office, which will be the new baby's new bedroom over there. Um,
I am so jelly.
I wouldn't even know how to A, find the drive to read those, or B, how to connect it to a modern computer.
Mm.
And if you could even find one to connect, and I'm sure like Windows doesn't have a driver to read that, like there's. Anyways, I got a bunch of Infocom games on that same kind of disk. The other thing I wanted to say is about those old internet services like that. Like uh, recently, I was just as a joke posting on my timeline songs that should be the theme song of the Cult of Copy show if I had any kind of licensing budget, and I posted like, man, I must have done like 30 over the course of a few days, and I have a few more that were just like a joke, for people who are fans of the show and like music. But a lot of it was like, from that sweet spot where everybody's musical mind is, from like you're a teenager buying your own music with your own money up until maybe like college age. And then it drops off after that, where like you don't know who anyone is or what their songs are anymore. Um, and what's funny is like through the internet, I still listen to a lot of new music. I just have no idea who it is. Like what I've let go of is knowing what something is to the degree that like I'm gonna go buy that guy's album. Like because they don't even do that anymore. Like that used to be the thing when you'd hear a song on the radio, you want to know who it was by, what the album was, so you could go buy that cassette, have that song plus like 9 other songs that are maybe probably not as good as that one that they chose to put on the radio. That's how they used to do music. But anyway, I digress completely again. I was listening to Bjork, her album Post from like was that like the mid to late 90s. I remember having that on cassette in high
Yeah.
school. And there's this song that begins with what sounds like modem sounds. And I'm like, would anyone listening to this song today know that sound? Like it was meant to be evocative of a particular telephone sound that literally doesn't happen anymore. Would anyone even know what that is? It's like when you look at computer interfaces and the icon for save is a little like floppy disk.
Yeah.
Like who's even seen, like does anyone even know what that means anymore? I don't think so. Or it's just like your iPhone, the icon for phone looks like an old handset receiver. Has a phone looked like that in forever? I don't think so. But it that shape, that icon exists. Anyway, completely digressing from what we're going to talk about, but I find that kind of thing fascinating. Um, Seven Deadly Sins, finally, part two. Halfway through the show, we're going to get to the actual advertised content of the show. I hope you don't mind. I actually kind of the show now is kind of hitting its stride where I like to kind of freestyle and talk about all kinds of things. So hopefully you like it more now than maybe earlier episodes where I stuck strictly on topic. Because I do it every week. I want to talk to people about the cool stuff that I encounter, so hopefully you enjoy those conversational bits too. But finally, here's this week's content on the remaining 3 deadly sins of the full list of 7, previous 4 of which we covered last week. This week we are going to cover greed, wrath, and envy. And like we talked about, we'll talk about how these deadly sins are deadly because they're tied to drives, appetites, insatiable hungers for certain things that we as humans evolved to want and need. And because of those drives, you can use these quote unquote sins to sell people things. And not only that, the reverse of those sins, aka the 7 heavenly virtues, which again you'll get the rest of if you listen to the previous episode from last week, the reverse of these sins, these virtues, can also be used to sell people things because they're lined up along the same human need. And whether you're indulging it or you're resisting it, it doesn't matter, because it's an insatiable desire that you can tap into to get people to do what you want. So first, let's talk about greed. Now, greed, I work in the marketing field. A lot of the people who are customers of mine and followers and people who are even listening to the show work as freelance marketers. So you're going to get greed because we're business entrepreneurial people. Like you understand it. There's a lot of people, for example, that like venerate Gordon Gekko from Wall Street as a hero for saying greed is good, which makes me laugh because he's the villain of that movie. Which I get. Like, Darth Vader's the coolest dude in Star Wars. You know, sometimes you want to support the villain, but like people who watched Wolf of Wall Street and think that dude is awesome instead of like a jerk. Like, the movie is deliberately meant to mess with you in that way. The same, like Scorsese kind of does that with all his movies. It's the same thing with Goodfellas. Like, you watch Goodfellas and you're like sad at the end because it was way awesomer when those guys got to be unrepentant criminals, because they're fun, interesting guys, even though they are totally vicious criminals. You still like them, and that's the trick. Like Scorsese, like a lot of people misunderstand Scorsese's work, criticize him for glorifying the violence. I don't think he glorifies it. He's just exploring his own fascination with characters like that, which has a long history. I mean, you look at like Robin Hood, who's venerated as a folk hero when essentially he was a highwayman robbing people at, you know, threat of violence. He's considered a hero, but he was totally a thief. And the whole story of like, well, the people he stole from deserved it, and he gave it to people who deserved it more. Okay, yeah, but he still like threatened people with their lives to steal things from them. So, you know, sure, he kept a little piece for himself too. You know, it's not like he gave 100% of it to everyone who was poor. Anyways,
I like how they framed Robin Hood in Shrek, right? His little song and dance.
Right. I mean, it's... And even today, there are these characters that are like criminals, but you're like, oh, I get it, you're cool. You know? Like, it's somewhat glorified when someone pulls one over on, like, the Fat Cats or the Gummit. You know?
Yeah.
Like, for example, a recent one is when they had the housing market collapse and houses started getting foreclosed on by banks. Basically, some guy, through a quirk of the law and the paperwork, they mistakenly tried to foreclose on him, and he was awarded by the court value equal to what he was owed, and the bank didn't show up in time to claim it, so he basically just walked into the local branch office of that bank with the sheriff and started confiscating shit, which was his right. So he just walked into the bank and is like, that computer's mine, and that computer's mine. All these desks are mine. Everyone go home because we're closing the doors. I own this branch. And, of course, the bank very rapidly cut him a check that day after waffling for a long time. But, again, that's one of those where, like, you know, like, the bank, I'm not saying the bank is a good guy, but that guy was totally being a dick to get what he wanted, and he's like celebrated for it in some way.
Right. I saw a course a while back that was that I think used that same angle. It was all about the tax lien certificates, right? Like, you pay the tax, and if the people don't respond in time, you get the house free and clear, which is like, you know, their major like logo.
Right.
You get it free and clear. And
well,
some
what's so
houses you can
funny?
get for $1.
What's so funny, and we see this a lot in the internet marketing world, and the only reason this is a bit of a digression, but it ties into this idea of greed being a human drive. there's a ton of people in the internet marketing world that if they would just give up trying to find the shortcut or the gimmick or the loophole to get rich quick, if they put that same effort into actually growing a legitimate internet business. Because really, when I talk about internet business, like you're in touch with billions of people. Like just on Facebook, there's a billion users. You know what I mean? Like you can build an audience anywhere, and most of the fortunes built in at least the 20th and 21st century are built because of audiences. Even like brand loyalty to manufactured products is essentially a cultivated audience. Like they offered them a choice to say, are you this kind of person or that kind of person? And people piled into the different piles, and they make money by repeatedly marketing things to the tastes that are cultivated in those different pockets. And that's all internet marketing should be, is you're gathering your own audience. If you're watching this show, you're in my audience. If you're in my group, you're in my audience around this subject of like copy and persuasion and that kind of thing. But that's all I'm doing. I'm making a channel. I'm making a little bucket for people to voluntarily put themselves into. And I make my living because some of those people spend money on this topic if they're, actively engaged enough in the topic. And that's cool because I have good products and people like them. So it's like a win-win situation, right? Like no one's getting screwed over. I'm not shoving anything down anyone's throat. It's just, if you like this stuff for free and you want to explore more, I charge a little for this, and that's how I make my living and support my family. And everyone's cool with it. I have total control of it. I didn't sign like 40% of it away to a record company or a media company. Like I run my own ads, as you've heard me say. So that's cool. That's cool. But there's this undercurrent of people in internet marketing that are about that greed angle, that are like, we got to get one over on someone else. There's got to be a loophole, a trick, a scheme, a scam of some kind. And I feel so bad for those people because I just want to say, like if you spend half the effort that you spend looking for those loopholes on something legitimate, you would actually get traction. But that's not that's boring. The Italian Job is not about that. You know, the Thomas Crown affair, like that dude didn't do it the hard way. Get out of here with that. Everyone wants a shortcut. Now, I think that is directly tied to this human drive of greed. Now, the instinctual drive that greed stems from is preparation, right? This idea of being prepared for setbacks. And it's a little more advanced because not a lot of humans, not a lot of non-human animals prepare per se the way we think, right? This is going to sound funny. I didn't realize this until like I was an adult, and it was one of those embarrassing epiphanies. Squirrels, everybody knows squirrels bury nuts, right? Like they bury acorns all winter. I thought like the squirrel remembered where it buried certain nuts. It doesn't. Like they just fucking bury them everywhere, and then they dig randomly hoping to find one. Like they don't know where those are. It's a squirrel. Come on. It's got no memory. It's just like, I buried a bunch of nuts in this yard. This is the yard where I live. There's probably going to be nuts right here. I'm going to dig it up.
I didn't know either.
Yeah. So like, sometimes it finds one, and a lot of times it doesn't. And surprise, that nut will like, sprout and start to grow a tree. And that's what's in it for the tree in the whole squirrel tree arrangement. But this idea of preparing is sort of a uniquely human one, where like you hoard food or resources, or you set up your living space next to an important resource like water, and then you want to like control it and dominate and keep other people from having access to that same resource. And that stems from a time, obviously, where that kind of thing in human survival is scarce. And still, geographically, depending on where you live, that kind of thing is scarce. There are some places where people live that without modern infrastructure, no one could live there at all. Like vast frozen wastelands in like Canada and Siberia and stuff where people live. Like no one is coming with reindeer if like the road is out. You know what I mean? Like the only reason you can live there is because people are bringing you stuff. Otherwise, like There's a reason humans didn't penetrate that glacial wasteland for tens of thousands of years. So this idea of preparing is, I think, where greed comes from. This idea of like amassing and hoarding and saving and stockpiling, while maybe living slimmer than you would need to, with this idea that you're saving it for a rainy day. You know what I mean? This idea, it's almost like a good idea. You know what I mean? This idea of like being miserly and like, I'm gonna live. In fact, that's like one of these entrepreneur like mantras you see people say, like, where I'm gonna live like no one is willing to for a few years, so I can live like no one can later on. That idea, like you're gonna sacrifice your present existence somehow by saving things and investing it in the future. That, I think, is what triggers greed. Greed is the perversion of that drive, which is a sensible drive. Greed is just when you're like, you have more than you can ever use, and it's more about like amassing more and more simply to keep score or to keep other people from having it, or whatever weird reason you have. It's possible to have more than you could ever need for yourself and your immediate progeny and even their grandchildren. Being from Louisiana, I have this weird admiration for Huey Long as a politician. And when he was pretending or angling towards this idea that he was going to run for president before he was assassinated in the 30s, his whole thing was like, I want you to be rich. I want you to be so rich that you don't have to work, your kids don't have to work, and your grandkids don't have to work. But anything after that, we're taxing because you don't need that much money. And, that idea would not fly in the United States today, but at the time when there were a lot more poor people who were a lot more active, that was a very popular idea of like, when is enough enough? Like, how much do you need to be provided for multiple generations into the future? Obviously, the United States business environment is a lot more amenable to people giving into their greed, so much so that despite how generous the United States is to businesses, they're like, we made too much money and we don't want to pay it in taxes, so we're going to hide it overseas in other countries so they can't tax it, even though the only reason we were able to make that much money is by selling to Americans using American business laws. I digress. That's the deal with greed. So the way you tap into people's greed is it's about this acquisition, this hoarding mentality, right? So if you want to sell something to someone on this idea of greed, lots of products that are about collectors, creating a collection of things, come from this ache for greed, this ache to have all of or enough of something. So any items that are somehow like collectible or stockable, or like things that you use a lot of, like they can sell you 1,000,000 pack of toilet paper if they give you a significant enough discount and you can fit it in your car. You know what I mean? Like if you go to the grocery store every week, are you saving money by buying the like 50 pack of toilet paper rolls? Like, are you just taking up space in your house with this giant thing because you're not saving that much money? You can pay like 3 cents more and just buy it when you need it and have like this much instead of that much. But that greed is what's being tickled when they give you like the volume size. So like, people aren't businesses that shop at Costco or Sam's Club and like buy a gallon jug full of salsa, as like, you're not serving a whole restaurant, you're just like buying way more salsa than you possibly need at one time, or like giant industrial sized mayonnaise jar and you just use that for like a year. I don't know, does that go bad? That's kind of gross.
I don't know, but it should come with a giant pump,
Right. But that's the idea, like that's items that are configured that way appeal to, it doesn't feel like greed, but that instinct of like stocking up is based on that desire that greed is built on. Now, the reverse of greed is charity. And man, so much money is made off of charity. Like, I feel like I don't even have to talk about it. Like, there are so many quote unquote nonprofits that are like kind of profits for like a few people that work there, and then whatever's left over is for, you know, whoever the nonprofit organization is allegedly set up to benefit. Um, but that idea of charities, oh man, like how many? This isn't going to be everybody in the audience, but people in the audience who are like members of the Warrior Forum, and they would have like a benefit for a tsunami or something, and a bunch of people would throw in products, and it'd be like some portion of this will go towards helping the victims of some disaster or another. Not saying the money didn't go where it was supposed to, but that is a cash in on people's sense of charity by way of tapping into their greed. Because it's like you get to be charitable and greedy at the same time, right? That's why it works. Because like just asking people straight up charity doesn't do anything. Like you got to hit them where it hurts. Like, you know, sure, sometimes charity works, but like your average beggar on the street that like makes a bunch of money, that's not charity. That's like tapping into pity. That's tapping into like guilt. You know, I saw an article today. It was a video clip of this news reporter that kept busting this one dude who pretends to be handicapped, both physically and mentally, as a panhandler. And he basically would like go up to the guy, and the guy wouldn't recognize him because the reporter hadn't talked to him in a couple of years, and be like, "Your name's not Gary Davis. Your name's Gary Thompson." And he's like, "No, no, turn the camera off, turn the camera off." And he goes immediately from like, wheelchair fell over, dropped all my coins, people took them, to like, don't want to talk to you, I don't want to talk to you. He like had footage from across the street of the guy like walking around, you know, giving people high fives and stuff. Anyways, those people prey on charity, but charity by itself is not a strong drive. And again, especially in the United States, you see this kind of thing where like, because of the idea that the American dream exists, somehow like if you're down on your luck and having a hard time, that's like you're fucking doing, you know, like you did it. Why don't you just like get 10 jobs? You know, like you only make $350 per job. Get like 10 jobs. You know, what's the problem? Just get 10 jobs and work 90 hours a day. What's the problem? But there's this resistance to charity. But when you look at charity as being part of this axis tied to greed, then you can get some mileage. Then you can get some leverage. That idea of like, we're going to give you a bunch of stuff to tickle your greed glands and say, oh, you're getting all this for a low price, but we're going to give a portion of it to charity that uses that charitable drive to get money out of people. Another way that charity tickle is used is with politics. They'll do these huge fundraisers for politics, but they'll hinge it on issues wherein people are suffering and need help. But really that politician's just promising, like, if I get elected, I'm going to help with that. You're not giving the money to those people. You're giving the money to the campaign to get that guy elected on the hope that that guy or gal is going to do what they promised to do for the people with that particular affliction. But a lot of times fundraising for all kinds of things follows that avenue where it's like, it's for this, but instead of giving the money to that, give it to us first, and then we'll do a thing, and then we'll give what's left to those other guys. That's just how charity gets used to sell things. Next we have wrath. Now, wrath, I think, stems from the instinctual primal urge toward positioning, right? To where I'm claiming this area or this status, and if you mess with that in any way, I'm going to have to retaliate against you mightily so that everyone knows that this position for me is secure, right? That's where wrath comes from, is positioning, I think, in like ancient animal tribal ways. Hopefully that makes sense. Like, it's about claiming something and then being able to defend it, right? That's what wrath is, to where if you challenge me in any way, I'm going to have to burn you down way worse to make an example of you, to make a lesson of you, in order to secure this particular position or stance or status, whatever the case may be. the way you use wrath to sell things to people is there are tons of people who just go around feeling like life is unfair. And I hate to bring this example in because it's a recent tragedy, but on Memorial Day, they just had that shooting in the United States where this like privileged, well-to-do kid drove around in his BMW shooting people out of the window of his car because he felt girls at his college weren't giving him enough attention. He was acting on this impulse of vengeance and retribution, as in like he felt like someone had taken something from him that he deserved. Now that wasn't the case. He felt that way, and it was a strong enough emotion to cause this terrible action out of him. That should give you an idea of how strong this emotion is. This idea of not, I don't want to say vengeance, because everyone has this idea, especially in like a Judeo-Christian sort of culture and upbringing, that vengeance is wrong. You know that vengeance is wrong. You know that revenge is wrong. But this idea that there's certain kinds that are like righteous or deserved, that it's just retribution, that's when you can really move people. And there's so much negative action promoted, not so much in advertising, but in politics. Like a lot of the politics in the US are driven by negative motivation that is about not positive action or doing something good for people, but like putting someone in their place or knocking them down or getting vengeance for some other thing that happened, regardless of what's actually on the table. Because it's such a strong motivator, you know? Like everyone feels like that, you know, like there's a reason the phrase, the grass is always greener on the other side. There's a reason that phrase exists, and it's because the people have a tendency to only see the good things other people are getting and dwell on the negative things that happen to them. Whereas everyone's in that position, so it doesn't matter how good the guy you're looking at is, he feels shitty and like someone else has a better game of it than him. You know what I mean? Everyone feels like they're wronged in some particular way, and that someone's getting the better of it, that someone's getting a fairer shake, or that the whole world is fair except when it applies to them, and somehow it's unfair when the rules of the universe are applied to them. So they get the short end of the stick over and over and over again, and eventually some people crack and they decide that they want to exact their revenge. That feeling, you can use that to sell people a lot of things. That idea of getting back at people. The pickup artist movement is one that taps into this in what I feel is kind of a negative way. And it's that same idea that like you feel like you're owed this affection from women, here's how to take it. And it preys on that idea of revenge and retribution against what they feel like they've been denied that they deserve. Then there's that idea of like indignation. So like a lot of times in American politics, there's this idea that somehow people that want to do a certain thing are trying to take your rights away from you. So do this particular action as like rebellion or resistance, or show them that they can't, or put them in their place, or teach them that you won't stand for that. There's so much of that. And even like in stupid things like Facebook shares, where they like dare you to share this certain thing. Like they dare you to be outraged over some particular thing. Any advertising or promotion or propaganda that's built around outrage and offense and retribution and indignation, whether it's like, you know, righteous and deserved, or just like, we're not going to let those scumbags get away with it, even if it's like something super crappy, you know, like it doesn't even have to be like, well, anyone would be mad at that. You can rally people around some stupid, idiotic fear that they have. It doesn't even have to make sense, because when you get into wrath, you're already dealing with irrational emotions. So those are ways to tap into it: ideas of vengeance and ideas of indignation. And then the opposite of wrath is patience. So patience is one of these things that comes up a lot in like self-help products and like motivational type things, because patience is something that human beings don't have a lot of. So it's one of these things where you can promise it as a band-aid and then constantly charge people to work on it because they're going to be bad at it, because patience is not something that comes easily to a lot of people, especially in modern times. This idea of tapping into both patience and wrath at the same time as a marketing angle is one of these things where, like, aren't you outraged? Sign this petition. You know what I mean? Like, no one's like, take to the streets. No one actually wants to provoke vicious action by way of wrath. But when they tap into wrath as a strong emotion to get people fired up, you need to give them this outlet. So, like, that's why it works so well in politics, because it's like, you know, you're mad as hell and you're not going to take it anymore. So give us a bunch of money to get this party going, to elect this politician, and one day we'll have enough influence to do what it, you know what I mean? Like, it's get super mad so we can take a really long time to enact any change whatsoever. They're simultaneously wanting to tap into the outrage, but promising that, like, patience is a virtue when it comes to delivery. The opposition to that is when there's like a movement to do something negative, and it's like a big like uproar all of a sudden over something, and then one angle is like, we'll just play it safe, we'll wait them out, you know, we're on the side of right, we'll take our time, we're going to stay the course. Positioning things like that against the irrationality of like agitation is using patience as a marketing ploy. It's where you're like, you know, those guys want to change everything, it's going to be bad, it's going to cause a bunch of mess, they're just being scared, we should stay the course, be patient, wait it out, don't have to be reactionary. Anything selling along those lines is using that virtue and offsetting it against the negative of wrath for the sake of building an audience up. Could you do that if there wasn't this agitated anti-audience? Maybe not. To give an example of it in a different angle, it would be sort of like punk as a movement existed as a counterculture thing against the status quo. But then the status quo reinforced itself against punk by going with the patience angle and saying, look, it's just a phase, they'll grow out of it. And what's crazy is it totally worked. Like, punk kind of fizzled out and just turned into like corporate rock within a decade. And the dudes with the money and the suits were right. They're just like, you know, wait it out, give them some money, it'll be fine. Like, not going to change anything. Politics are going to be fine, rich dudes are going to stay rich, we're good, don't worry about it. You know, even that seems like a reversal, but that's an example of how patience can be offset against wrath and be seen as like the right path to take. While everyone else is being about wrath, you're like, no, we'll be peaceful and we'll play it chill. That's the way to go. You can convince people that way. We've gone over the hour, but we have one more to cover, and we're going to finish it so I can be on a totally different topic next week. Envy. Envy should kind of be self-explanatory when it comes to how you use that in advertising, since basically like the whole concept of keeping up with the Joneses and portraying certain items as being like standard features of the typical home and advertisements in order to make people want to fit that standard. All of that ties into envy. The drive of envy, I think, stems from this idea of efficiency, to where like I don't have to rediscover new things and reinvent the wheel if I can look at what that guy's doing, and if what he's doing works, I'll copy it and it'll work for me. But envy is the backfiring of that mechanism when you're not like, what is that guy doing to get what he has that I want? You're just like, I want that guy's stuff. Maybe I can just go take it. Or maybe I deserve that stuff. I covet that stuff because I see him have it. I'm a good guy. I work just as hard as him. I'm just as smart as him. Why don't I have those things? Could be for any number of reasons, but that's where envy stems from. Because we do have this instinct to look at how other people are doing things and how they're proceeding, how they're getting by, how they're getting ahead. And the reason we have that drive is because, like, monkey see, monkey do. You see how they do their thing. You get better at doing your thing. Theoretically, the entire species becomes elevated. That's how best practices propagate in a pre-language society. You just watch what the other guy's doing, and if it works good, you do that. It'll work good for you, and then somebody copies you, and then pretty soon everybody's doing it. And then, if it happens to be a good thing, everybody wins, we propagate, another generation continues, so on through the millennia. But again, that hijacking comes from covetousness, which is like, I see what you have and I want it, but I'm not looking at what you're doing to get it. The real way to acquire what someone else has, if you want it, is to look at the activity they took and imitate that activity. But somehow they get short-circuited in the idea of envy, where you just want what other people have, and you want the shortcuts, you want to take it, you want the benefit of everything they have without the work it takes to actually earn it. Again, much like wrath, the way to sell to this instinct is to play off of that idea of unfairness. Like, no one thinks that people who are more successful than them deserve it, really, when it comes down to it. No one's like, well, that guy, we work the same job at the same company, but he makes more than me because he's better. Like, no one thinks that. They think, like, I'm just as smart as that guy. I work just as hard as that guy. I should get what he gets. When that actually may be true, but for whatever reason, he's claimed a position that you don't have, and like, it's not just going to be handed to you, right? Like, that's one of the tricks with envy, is that people who are good at taking what they want usually don't have a lot of envy, because the urge is very quickly satisfied because they see something they want and they take it. Like, they don't spend a whole lot of time like coveting and wringing their hands and getting distraught about it, because if they see something they want, they go after it, and if they don't get it, they usually like figure out a plan B to get something damn near close to it. Whereas envy, people that envy short circuit get stuck on that one specific thing, but they don't take measures to get it on their own terms. They just wallow in the unfairness of it all. And again, just like wrath, the way to sell to those people is to play off of that desire for equalizing things, for making it even, for getting that modicum of revenge, because you're getting what you feel like you deserve, that you see other people have, that should just be given to you because you're better than them. They're not better than you. You're just as good, if not better. Those things should be handed to you the way it's perceived that it's been handed to those other people, even though it hasn't really. I mean, that's one of the real problems with, like, it always seems like jerks and assholes get ahead in the world, but it's because they just, like, see stuff that they want and they go after it hard, and, like, they fail a lot, but also they have crappy risk-reward calculations. So, like, they take way more risk than normal, and, like, it's just statistic that sometimes if you gamble a lot, you might win big. So then they win big, and then you're like, well, I play fair, I play by the rules, I don't take stupid gambles, and this guy's, like, way ahead of me in life. How come? It's because, like, he bets way more often than you, and sometimes that pays off. Of course, there's a huge pile of, like, idiot corpses of people who make bad bets that never hit one that paid off, and you don't see those guys because they're not in front of you for you to covet and envy, because they're not splashing it in your face. But really, like, so much. Like, basically, if there's something that there's a commercial for, it can tap into envy to sell it. The kind of things that don't sell on envy don't even have commercials, really, because they're so high end. Like, no one's selling yachts via TV commercial. Like, if you want a yacht, you're rich enough to like go in and you tell them exactly what kind of yacht you want, and you get it. Maybe even there's envy happening there, but it's happening at like the marina. It's not just like you're walking down the street rich as hell and you're like, I'm miserable, like I want what that guy has. That's not usually what it's like. It's usually a little bit more stratified, but in general, anything that's got a TV commercial to make you want it is in some way going to tap into envy, whether it's keeping up with the Joneses or a little bit aspirational to get a little bit better of a lifestyle than the one you currently enjoy, or something's just a little bit nicer, it'll make you a little bit happier, your kids will like you more, your spouse will want to be with you more, you'll get a little more respect at work. Whatever it is, it's all of these emotional triggers tied to that envy. Because like I said, like literally the richest guy on the planet with the most power, that guy wants something. You know what I mean? Like, there's something that is out of that guy's reach that he thinks someone else has, because there's nothing you can get in this life without sacrificing something else. So like the typical angle is the rich and powerful had to sacrifice happiness gained through relationships, right? Because it takes a lot of time and positioning. You can't make good relationships that you invest yourself in emotional if you're after power, because you're going to hurt people. So you don't put yourself in a position to be hurt by having those kind of relationships. Or like, if you want to be rich, want to be super rich, you like don't bother getting anything but like trophy relationships that support your path to the top of the corporate ladder, or whatever the case may be. No matter what position you're in, you had to give something up to have that. And like really, I think maybe like the poorest, least connected jungle tribesman might be the only dude to be able to claim like a complete lack of envy, because he's just completely unaware of what other people have other than like just feeding himself with what's in front of him. And that's not necessarily happiness the way we understand it in the modern world, but there's something to be said with being like wholly preoccupied with just not dying that day. Like there's not a whole lot of bandwidth for anything else. Like if you get to go home and sleep in a hut and it doesn't rain on you, and maybe you have a wife and you're not going to starve to death the next day because you found some berries, like that's pretty good. You know what I mean? Like you don't have time to be concerned about what other people have. It'd be very hard to sell people on that. The opposite of envy is kindness, which good luck selling that, man. Like people, like kindness has got to be the single hardest thing to get out of people, because even when people make an effort to be kind, they're also really, really, really looking for like acknowledgement for being kind, right? It's not enough to do a good thing. You gotta like film a Vine about it and post it to see how many likes you get. It's not enough to want to help somebody. You gotta like, I don't know, make a big thing about it. And there's something to be said for that, because like if you're gonna get value out of it, it's very, very hard for individuals to give value to themselves, right? For people to do something and be like, I'm really proud of myself, and that's enough. That's hard. Like there's not a whole lot setting people up to be able to be that kind of person, where it's not in some way about competition with someone else or about gaining something that someone else has. It's very, very hard to find people who are truly self-satisfied. And part of the reason of that is if you are truly an easily self-satisfied person, you don't accomplish the kind of things that get attention out of other people, right? Like if you just sit around being like super pleased with yourself all the time, you're not driven to do anything that will get attention and accolades out of anybody. So you just kind of like sit around and like do your own thing, and you care about the people around you, and you're probably very kind to them and expect nothing in return. But there's like no reward in that. It's so weird that just the simple act of being kind, the only way to really do it is if you expect absolutely nothing in return. And there's almost no situation that you can find yourself in where that's like desirable or beneficial to do. And that's really not like some kind of criticism of modern life. It's just really like reality in general. Like kindness, I almost think kindness to people that aren't like your progeny, in which case, like, of course, you want to be nice to your offspring because that's how your genetics are gonna survive. You have a biological imperative for that. Kindness in any other capacity is almost like I think a human psychological invention, because it doesn't happen very much at all in nature, and when it does, it's not like animals can think in altruistic terms. There's really funny, uh, like one of those little image comic strips of like little images put together in a row, like photos taken in sequence and then put together like a comic strip. And it's of a cheetah and a deer, a little baby deer, like a baby cheetah and a baby deer. Like first they're chasing, and then they're playing, and then they're cuddling, and you're like, oh, and then the last one, the cheetah is eating the shit out of that deer because it's a cheetah, and that's how animals are. You know what I mean? Like it was like this was fun to play with my food for a little while before I ate it, but like that's what I'm here for. That's what's going to happen. Um, so to that end, like in my mind, like kindness is not something that exists in the animal kingdom. And if you want to use kindness to sell things to people, that urge for kindness, you always need to tie it to that desire of envy, where everyone's going to know exactly how kind you were. Like you get a big sticker, and everyone's going to know what a great person you are. So like even things like Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever, where you're like donating to a cause and you may get zero benefit, even if it's funded. They may never do it, and you can't do anything to get your money back. But when you pay a certain level, you get shown as being that level of supporter. Like you get a badge to give you like a reward to say everyone knows that you gave a whole bunch to like Solar Roads or to bring Reading Rainbow back or to get a new Planescape video game or whatever the case is.
Well,
But
and people talk about it all the time, like, oh yeah, I contributed to this Kickstarter thing, and they get a kick out of talking about it.
yeah, they do, and it's it's one of those things. I've been in the room before with like a bunch of super really just rich people that have more money than what they know what to do with, like Silicon Valley web designers who had tons of stock before the web bubble burst in the early aughts and like cashed out at the right time. So they're like multimillionaires at like 22, don't know what to do. And they brag to each other about the things that they contribute to donation wise. And what's funny is I couldn't name you names if I wanted to because I don't remember them because I'm terrible at that kind of thing. But I hope I don't identify anybody in a way where they'll get mad at me and, get really expensive lawyers to yell at me. But the same people that would complain to each other about the size of their donations to various, like, oh, did you hear about this one? Oh, yeah, I gave like, 20 grand to those guys this past year. The same guys that would do that are the same guys that, I shit you not, more than one guy were talking about their different strategies of like preparing for the end times. And like you see these shows about preppers and whatnot, and like that's on like the amateur to low end. Like if you have millions, the way your prep game works is you buy a lot of land out in the desert between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, and you buy a tractor trailer and a backhoe, and you fill the tractor trailer with ammunition and guns and canned goods and money, and you bury it in the desert with GPS coordinates that no one knows except for you. And you have like 5 or 6 of these in various spots. That's what like super rich paranoid people do. And like I'm listening to this conversation and they're like trading tips on like who to talk to buy like no man's land off the highway in the middle of the desert so they can like bury money in case they need it in the future. Whereas I'm like, get salt and bullets. Because like if you have enough salt and bullets, like you can just take gold if you even want it. You know, there's like a reason ancient kings were buried with all that golden treasure. Because like the king's dead, nobody can buy it. No one wants it. It's just shiny metal. Who cares? Like you can't eat it. Won't preserve meat. Can't stab anybody with it because it's too soft. Good luck with that. If the entire global economy crashes, gold will be worthless. Oh, sure, they use it in electronics. They're not going to be making a lot of iPhones if, you know, a giant solar flare wipes out all of the electronics on Earth. I promise.
See, now all I want to do is I want to like see some sort of sci-fi series of like the post-apocalyptic scenario of like this is what all those rich people would do, and if all these spots are everywhere, like this is the uprising in the post-apocalyptic.
Well, I told the guy, I'm like, if everything bad that you think is going to happen happens, how are you going to find your tractor trailer in the desert? He's like, I know the GPS coordinates. I'm like, do you know how to use a compass and a map? Do you have a detailed map? He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, the phone that you check GPS with is one company. The service providing those results to that phone is another company. The satellite is owned by a third company. And then, like, you have the whole government telecommunications layer on top of that infrastructure is relied on for any of that to work. So do you have a map and a compass, and could you find that shit without your phone? Because if what you think is going to happen that you're burying that shit out in the desert for, if that happens, your phone's not going to work, dude. And he's like, I hadn't thought of that. You know, but oh well. I'm like, is there water in there? He's like, no, man, it gets too hot in there. The water explodes and then it all evaporates. I'm like, so you buried a cache out in the middle of the desert in the hopes that in some post-apocalyptic future you will have the fuel and resources to journey into the desert to go somehow get a bunch of bullets and gold. And then, I don't know, carry it out again with no water? Okay, whatever. Whatever. I'm not a survivalist. I'm sure you have it all thought out. But anyways, that's, I guess, the end of the show. I think we talked about everything. We went a little over, but I wanted to finish up this week in case, because it's literally any day now that we're going to have this kid. He's due June 1st. So, give or take, if we're already back home from the hospital or if he's running a little late, I'll be back next week at this time. If not, you know, we'll delay it by a day or so. Once again, if you like the conversation we had, the topics that we discussed on this show, you can join the discussion group at cultofcopy.com. I'm your host, Reverend Dr. Sir Colin D. Terrio, founder and chief raconteur of said Cult of Copy. You are more than welcome to join us if you would like. If you like this show, don't necessarily want to join a discussion group. You can watch this show for free. We record live episodes Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, barring technical difficulties, but that's the regular schedule. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/cultofcopy. Please subscribe if you're watching it there. If you happen to be listening to the audio version on a podcast at some point after this recording was made, when I finally get it on iTunes and Stitcher and various other avenues, please do subscribe, click like, leave us a comment in any of those places you may find the content. I'm going to check with Zane real quick to see if we had any comments or questions or additions or anything.
Yeah, from what I've seen, actually just a lot of people watching quietly. Something new about this particular episode, we had a bunch of people just show up like towards the end. So, like, guys, leave the comments, but we're going to be leaving soon. So, there it is.
Yeah, please do. We come back every week. If there's anything also that you would like us to discuss on future episodes, I'm going to be doing one every week. So please, please make suggestions for future content for the show. If you do join our community, we're usually very friendly. Don't spam. But, if you like this topic, you can learn a lot from our particular community. And the show is our attempt to perform some outreach out to the rest of the world and see if anyone is interested in the kind of things that we are in the cult. Unlike most cults, you don't have to give us all of your money, just as much of it as you want to. So join us when you can. That's going to be it for this week, and we will see you hopefully next Thursday. If not, keep your eye in this general vicinity for when the next episode is. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.